Whether you want to move on this planet or others, Movement 4.0 from Babies to Astronauts offers you a new and exciting insights on gravity, space, and all that happens in between. Welcome to Episode 4, What Makes Earth So Special. I'm Michelle Turner, creator of Movement Lesson. Many of you know me from my work with special children. From my clinic in Phoenix, Arizona, to traveling and teaching around the world, I wanted to reach out to you with my new theories of gravity and felt a podcast would be a great way to connect with you. What makes Earth so special? Now, most of you are thinking that it is water and air, and that's really important to live off of. Again, I'm here to talk about movement. This is why it's Movement 4.0. You need to learn about movement. You need to learn about how we work, how we move. We move, and our structure of movement is based off of responding to the Earth's structure of movement. We counter all of those movements. And what makes not only the rotation within rotation imperative to our survival and our organization, but as I've been teaching you, it's gravity, buoyancy, rotation. Those are the three key things. But the Earth is special. Why? Because it has an atmosphere. It actually has a very key atmosphere. And we're going to be getting into that with this discussion on what it takes to create something very unique in human beings or our level of movements, which is momentum. So let's look at throwing a baseball, 97 miles an hour. Man steps up, pitches it out. We're in awe of his feat. We don't appreciate his vision, how he can watch first base, third base, who's stealing what, who's catching what, who's up next. There's an organization that goes on, and that's why we love the game. Baseball's amazing, but so is cricket. There's many other football. So many things that take to throw with that not only type of accuracy, but momentum. We have a way of organizing this power from within, this precise power from within, which you're not going to see on other planets. If I go to throw a ball on another planet, first of all, it won't really even be a throw. It'll be more like I'm pushing the object. You see that really evident in space. But it's the act of throwing. Most of the people look at the act of throwing as when something leaves your hand and where it gets to, which might be across, let's say, a base. That's not the act of throwing. That's why I work with children with special needs. Might seem like such a little insignificant task that you might do. You might throw a tissue into a garbage can and not think anything of it. That type of organization of movement is not easy to acquire when you have special needs, let's say. Now, we used to blame this on brain organization, trauma, let's say, or genetics that cause the brain to malfunction or miswire communication going into the body. But what I've been presenting is actually the opposite. The brain does have some effect over this, more so within its relationship of rotation and buoyancy and the way the body can respond. But if the body is not set up with these key movements that the Earth provides for us, the human body will start to fail. And this is why I keep presenting that astronauts, in a sense, what we're doing to them is very similar to how a person would respond that has cerebral palsy. You might be putting all might and effort into what you call muscle mass, but yet at the same time, what you get in response is muscle atrophy. So I'm trying to show you my theories in gravity and biological laws of gravity that I have figured out, and I'm presenting the way movement is structured and how we respond. So first of all, we're not only going to look at Earth's rotation. Obviously, we revolve around the sun, but we don't really just take you did this in science, right? You drew a picture of the sun, you stick a pin in it, right? And then you took a string with your pencil around it, and that's our Earth's rotation. Well, that's not really how it works. We do have the rotation within rotation just by having the moon's influence over it, but we are not really positioned around an axis base of the sun. We're actually chasing the sun, or we're propelling the sun, however which way you're looking at it. But the sun is the driving force, and the planets are following this. So it's almost like a trail. And the sun is moving throughout our galaxy, and so is our solar system moving throughout our galaxy. So these kind of rotations, and now you're shown that space bends, but space has to rotate within the rotation of the planets, and that's the interaction that you're getting within that field. But most people look at the Earth spinning on its axis. That's not really how it works. The Earth really spins within itself. So this is one of the math equations I'm desperate to find, and I'm not a mathematician, but I'm looking to find what is the binding force when you have rotation against rotation and it creates a bind. Now we have it down to atoms. We have it in human beings. We have it in the Earth. I was so thrilled the day that I could actually feel a muscle spin. I have very sensitive touch, the way I work, the way I provide movement information into someone's system, especially when they don't know how to initiate movement. So the first key to what I do is I come in and where is a system failing to even initiate, let's say, a certain movement. And a movement is needed to go in opposition to gravity with rotation. And then I go in to stimulate that movement, and then I go to enhance that movement. And that's what development is. You don't go from rolling over to throwing something 97 miles an hour. There's a couple of steps involved besides aging that go into the characteristics of a human being to get them to that point. We have to look at the Earth is doing in relationship to that, because that's what creates, again, our momentum. And we can look at momentum by, let's say, weight. So if we're looking at the Earth's inner core to the outer core, right, it's believed that we have a molten inner core with iron. They can tell by seismic activity and the way that the seismic activity bounces off different layers in the Earth, approximately where the cores are and the depth of our cores. And this goes on with that, but we're looking at the inner core, and they believe, and I have to concur based off of the way I feel rotation in human beings, that the inner core counters the outer core. And then each core has to therefore continue to counter. This is where I believe, in a sense, what we feel as gravity comes from. It's a rotation within rotation, and that force against force, but it's a rotational force, creates a binding force. So between the outer core and the mantle, we're looking at almost a D layer, right? Where I believe that the momentum of the Earth's core differs from that in the mantle, and we need almost like bearings, where there's a layer of a rotation that changes the way the dynamics within the momentum because of the Earth's size. And then this continues throughout the lower mantle and the upper mantle into our continental crust and oceanic crust. However, if you want to really look at that, now to get momentum at a larger level, you have to take into account the atmosphere. So if you relate the inner core with the ionosphere, which is the farthest most layer of our atmosphere, and then you take the outer core and you compare it to the rotational differentials in the exosphere, so we're coming down in a layer of atmosphere. Again, that D layer will compensate with the thermosphere. The lower mantle is going to go in to relate to the mesosphere. The upper mantle, now we're looking at the stratosphere. The aethionosphere is looking at the tropospheres. Now these are all different levels of our core, our mantle, our crust, going against the atmosphere. So our lithosphere is just, again, almost like the D layer, where you just have a bit of that transition going into, and then you're going to mate the continental crust and the oceanic crust, or actually the sea. And so the movement of the sea and the movement of our Earth's crust, the way that it compels each other. And if you look at jet streams, atmospheric streams, you're going to see, again, continued rotations from those points. But it's the counter opposition or the counter rotation that creates a momentum. So one of the things that I'm looking at infant development, so many of you are familiar with, let's say, primitive reflexes that infants have. Now I say that there are points that we need to oppose gravity to have skeletal articulation. So when we're not meant to move, our skeleton's not meant to move, our bones, as we come out of our parents, out of the mother. So when the baby is first delivered, it almost comes out in a sense like a snake. There's no skeletal articulations. However, as soon as gravity appears, because this is a first exposure to gravity and a digestive or an expansion mode. In the womb, there is an expansion mode, but it's to grow in all directions in a frictionless environment. There is gravitational force. However, there's also a completion of amniotic fluid within a cellular level, but there's no elimination in a fetus, meaning there's no respiratory, there's no digestion, there's no elimination. So we can't compare the force of gravity because I'm not breathing. Well, my breath goes against gravity. That's the first thing that a child does or infant does in the neonatal period to really regulate where gravity is in relationship to that being. So as I've presented, when a child goes into respiratory distress, within, I would even say, the first 6 months of life, not just at birth, it doesn't purposely regulate muscle tonus. There's going to be a muscle tonus issue most likely, but also if you can't oppose gravity in breath, you can't oppose gravity in vertical manipulations. So without proper therapies, there's a very, very high risk that a child that is in respiratory distress at birth will also have vertical distress going into its milestones and will need some sort of therapy. So at the same time, when this is going on, the system starts regulating to its first time that it feels rotation. Because again, when you're in the womb, you're not going to have exposure to core-based rotation or atmospheric rotation just due to the fact that you're in the water. And fish go through a very similar process. That's what makes them amphibians versus mammals. But at the same time, they do have momentum. The way that they can take off and dart and swim and go from side to side. There's a key factor that goes in, again, with these forces of nature that we go through. So now if we look at Mars, first of all, Mars is 1/2 the radius of our planet. Okay, we have that. So our core really is just about the size of Mars, just our core. So again, what I'm comparing is not the size of the planet, but I'm comparing the size of the rotation and the momentum of that rotation. So Mars' core is much smaller, obviously, than ours, because if it's the size of our core, the whole planet, then the core itself. Mars thought to be much lighter, but actually what I believe, the reason the atmosphere is much lighter in Mars is because the core's rotation is not there to explore it. So if you look at their information, really their core relates to their exosphere, then the mantle starts to relate to their mesosphere, and then the crust goes with the troposphere. So there's really only 3 layers of atmosphere within Mars, much thinner, and we have 3 layers of core or inner planet that they're dealing with. So their relationship to momentum is different. So in a sense, when I go in outer space, go to, quote, throw a ball, first of all, I don't have that inner rotation, right? This is why our muscles break down. This is why we lose all our developmental milestones. And again, this is the relationship that I'm trying to talk to you about the way a human moves within space, not just outer space, right? Outer space does not mean just no gravity or microgravity, however you want to look at it. Because not in all places, again, you can go on a planet, there's gravity, but it's going to be different. And one of the key differences is the way that that planet rotates and has or does not have an atmosphere will create issues that we will not be able to have momentum. Momentum in just dribbling a basketball. But again, I was going into reflexes. So when a child, if you really look at, let's say, a plantar and a palmar reflex, let's say, they're opening and closing their toes. Most people think that the hands open and they close. In actuality, when fingers start to move against or from the human body as a baby and as an infant, the momentum or the tempo that a baby needs to have should be equal as they expose the back of their hands or their fingers as they push against gravity. So it's almost like if you put your hand in water and you were swaying it back and forth, you would feel an equal surface of the water's tension going against the fingers as you open and as you close. Now imagine that a newborn never having to have felt gravity, and you see this with astronauts returning to Earth, where gravity looks like somebody just sat on an astronaut, and the momentum needed for a baby, there's a very specific tempo of that feeling, that tension or that draw against gravity as they open the fingers and close it. Remember, When I go to open my hand, or as you go to open your hand doesn't fall to the floor. Gravity is not a pulling force and it's not a pinning force. Two living organisms. Now, if I drop my cup, yes, it's a pinning force and there will be a perpendicular action, and great, you've got the equations for that. What I'm trying to say is no matter what we are doing, whether we're just simply picking up a pen. Today, even I was just doing a Skype with someone and trying to help her because she's like the penmanship or the way she's holding the pen. And again, it's not about the way she's holding the pen. A pencil or a pen is a great example of how our core works and our atmosphere works. So imagine right now that you took a pencil in your hand and you go to write something. Well, imagine now the tip of the pencil is the core of the earth, the inner core, and the exterior, the eraser part, is the atmosphere. So you'll start to see a counter rotation. If you're just doing a letter or just say the number 0 or it's just a circle, you will see that you can take your lower fingers and thrust and rotate, but there'll be a counter rotation. So the rotation of the circle beneath on the paper mirrors in opposition the circle that the eraser makes, right? So again, if this is, just take a moment, pick up a pencil and look at that. That is all what the human body does. But when a child has cerebral palsy, that sensation of counter-oppositional rotational movements is just not there. It's not in the system. Any child that doesn't have the ability to exhibit or experience that kind of rotational momentum has special needs of some sort. And so the approach is not to put a hand splint on or to put in something to hold the pencil. Now, again, or another way of looking at that, if I had an immature grip and just grabbed the pencil with all 4 fingers and marked my lead down and did a circle, now you're not going to see that counter-oppositional rotation. You're going to see more of the centrifugal force that goes round and round, same. But again, you're not going to be able to have any transitioning skills, which would be going, let's say, from real rote, basic, very large print to finite script. And that's the same with the way humans move, just based off of having an atmosphere to a core ratio. So now if we look at the moon, they feel the core is about 20% of the size of the moon, okay? So it has a very small core. Now, also, I would doubt that the cores have oppositional rotation, because then you would see that reflect in the mantle or the crust, as the moon would have a rotation, and it doesn't. It's centrifugal force. So it has an inner core and outer core, and then it has a partial melt. So it has almost like the D level that we see. But also then if you look at the size of the mantle is, again, much larger than we have. So the core has to have a very high momentum, in a sense, if it were to spin that rock, which it just does not have the ability to do if it's still there. And I would assume it's decreasing as we go on. And there's no atmosphere, obviously, on the moon. So you're not looking at that counter-oppositional rotation. And this is where I really feel that if we colonize moon, it's actually going to be more of a detriment for humankind to colonize on the moon, because we are looking at not having rotational momentum, atmosphere, and again, that thrust that we go against. So really on the moon, if I were to, quote, throw a ball, it's like I have something and I'm sort of just lightly tapping it. It's almost like I have a volleyball and I have that light top, but I'm not going to get that thrust. Partially because I don't have that pelvic rotation to counter it, and that's what the pelvis does. The pelvis is sort of like having a D layer or the crust part. So the feet, in a sense, our core are one part of rotation. It counter oppositional through the pelvis. That's where movement can go in and out, up and down, and throughout the human body. And then you have the upper body, and that's what you need to create that momentum that's within our movement. Again, looking at the layers of the earth and the earth core, the mantle is a tad larger than the inner and outer core, but there's still an evenness to it. It's not an exact science, and you see that also in the layers of atmosphere. Let's look again at Earth and Mars. So first of all, the escape velocity for Earth is approximately 11,186 meters per second. Whereas in Mars, the escape velocity is actually approximately 5,000 meters per second. So again, you can see what we would look at maybe needing thrust and so forth, but the momentum within the rotation to escape out is different, and you need much more on Earth. So one of the problems that they're having with the Mars is that they need more fuel to leave the Earth and they need less fuel to leave. So the engines have to be different. And I think that's one of the reasons why they're looking to keep some of the rockets here as they take off, and then they'll have the same kind of system over there. So they're looking at different, I guess, thrust. Again, I'm not a rocket scientist. I'm just a movement specialist. So when you're looking at an escape velocity of even just rockets, that same type of ratio, in a sense, is needed within human beings. One of the reasons people age, they feel they don't have the stamina anymore. They don't have the speed that they used to. There's many things that go on. But also, Mars, though, rotates a heck of a lot faster. So you would think that with a revolution period of 686.98 for Mars, that it's spinning so much faster and it's smaller. Again, that you're hearing the difference between Earth and a tilt-a-whirl, in a sense, that we would have to adjust severely to not only less momentum, but now a higher spin rate. We're going to have, where they see now, an elevation of liquids towards the head versus they look at what we pull at the feet. We don't pull at the feet. It goes through our system differently. It's how we organize. Whereas, as you know, the revolution period in the Earth is 365. Even though you're looking at the same kind of calendar year with Mars to Earth or an Earth's day, it's farther away. So the amount of days, like I said, the revolution period is 686, where we have 365. It's going to, in a sense, throw the systems. The system has to be developed, but understanding of the momentum and the needed momentum in Earth's atmosphere, which will never equate in Mars. So we have to create equipment specifically for our core workout, not core strength, core workout, what we're doing to maintain, have, and eventually birth babies in another planet. These have to be taken into consideration because it's how we organize off of a rotational binding force. And you will see this rotational binding force in small layers if you're looking at core, and you're seeing it in large layers if you're looking at solar systems. When you're looking at the solar systems that are out there and whether they're going to become solar systems or planets or not, you really can start calculating, again, the rotational rate and the momentum rate and what it's going to take to create a planet. So I don't necessarily buy the argument also of the moon, but again, even if the moon was a branch off of the Earth, it's still not same. You have to look at the way we organize movement from the day we are born. And from the day we were born, we organize off of this oppositional rotation. If you look at my fifth law that I'm going to present, that gravity cannot be felt in outer space because there is no oppositional rotational movements. The binding force of gravity within living beings can only interact through internal rotational movements. Otherwise, one is more dominant than the other. When you're looking at an astronaut in outer space, not only can they not willingly perform an oppositional rotational movement, they can if their foot is hooked or something like that. They might, again, you see an exterior action. That's what I was talking about, throwing a baseball. But the way that the system is organized, I do not go around clipping my feet onto walls as I go to lean over. It throws the momentum off, immediately off to the system, and the system is getting a visual gratifying sensation that you spun, you rolled over, but the rotation is not going through the system. So again, in space stations, we need to devise exercises. And at the same time, this is what I do at Movement Lesson, but therapies from the day a child is born have to be produced and offered to a system, especially when that system, not that it's been traumatized. First of all, it has to be evaluated for these principles. This is why the APGAR scores does not equate to short to long-term concerns. A study done in Norway in 2010 was shown that 89.5% of the children with cerebral palsy had high APGAR scores. And an APGAR scores is really made for a nurse to speak to a doctor in regards to a child's health. if they're having a respiratory distress or something like that, or there's bluing in the skin, that they can have a way of talking to a physician. It's for their internal dialogue. It was never meant to be, is this baby going to be okay? A true healthy baby is one that goes home alive, and there's no follow-up or data done based off of the method of birthing style. However, other than my newborn assessment, I really don't know of any other method where they go in and they're evaluating the rotational responses within the baby's nervous system and how well they're ready to prepare for the world. And the more and more that we're changing these forces on an earth-based response as well as environmental responses of other means. Again, 1 in 6 in the U.S. have some kind of services or delays for that child. We need to look at that, but we still need to go back to the astronauts. We're sending people in space that might not be prepared for the short and long-term duration that they are meant to achieve. We're looking at muscle ratio, we're looking at mass ratio, and we're looking at their degrees and way they can handle things. They don't want hot shots. Let's say they want team players. They want people that are going to do the task at hand, do what they're told to do in that sense, but they're astronauts. It's not like a child where they're being told to do certain things. They're being told to do certain things because they are up there for the greater good. And they're there for risking death, and it can be very dangerous any moment. And they have to prepare for these drills. They're in a position that it's different than any person on Earth as far as job-wise goes. But I'm talking about if we're going to have multiplanetary conversations. We have to look at what Earth gives us. We have to look at the movement and how we, at an atomic level, a cellular level, acquire movement, the way we respond to movement, and the way we initiate movement, and then can create a skill. All developmental milestones, all reflexes depend on these forces with nature. All astronauts, anything that we're going to do to get us to Mars and beyond, need to start to be evaluated and worked with these principles, and not to assume that the strongest person wins. We're at a different level now. We've learned that. That's one of the things that's going on with what's going on now with our quarantines and with COVID. We're at a different level now. We have to start looking more intently of how the human body works and what we're going to do to help. It is my job to help lessen special needs throughout the world, and that's what I'm doing. I'm taking to the podcast. I'm doing things like this. I'm writing. I'm doing countless videos. I'm doing whatever I can other than hang off the Empire State Building, because that is my plight, and that's what I'm doing, and that's what I'm here to discuss. But we need to start taking the findings that I have of what's making a special child is no different than what we're doing to someone in outer space. We lose all the developmental milestones. We come up with autistic tendencies. They don't play well with others. When they come back, they're not offered the right opportunity for therapy to help them. Many children are not offered the right opportunity for therapy that can help them. And even more so now with the virus, all therapy's gone. All therapy is gone. Whether, again, you're recovering from surgery or not, special child, all therapy is gone until we get these resolved. It's really one of the biggest hits areas of my world. That being said, I really look forward to next week. I hope you're enjoying our discussions. I love your comments. We're really going to go into the Big Bang Theory of movement. So this is going to be covering the oppositional gravity and rotation with the momentum. And we're really going to look at where movement came from. We're looking at the planets and what we're getting from the planets, not just water and air, but now we're getting into the nitty-gritties of movement and where movement comes from. And when movement disappears, right? When movement disappears, this is where your grandmother might need help, your mother right after surgery, those people right now on a ventilator. That is what we have to look at, is what's going on with our movements. When a special child is not going into organizational skills, we can't just look at that it's a brain-based issue. It is the way that they process or are not processing movement. Any person that is trying to do something better or differently, there's just one word for it. It's movement. Thanks for listening to Movement 4.0. I really hope you subscribe. I'm very happy now to be on Apple Podcast as well. We're on Spotify and BuzzFeed. I'm Michelle Turner. You can get me at Movement Lesson Academy. That's movementlesson.academy. I'm all over Facebook, Instagram, all under Movement Lesson. I review videos of children. I help where I can. I have courses and trainings. Anywhere I can help from here to get us to Mars, you're going to have to listen to this. And I really hope that you're enjoying this. We've got a long, long road to recovery. I really hope that you're enjoying listening to this. My book is coming out very shortly. You can't get to Mars without me. Love discussing gravity. I really like discovering how gravity works within movement and how we move within gravity. Thanks for listening.